All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive
Okay.
into a case that really gripped this small town in Texas called Hemphill.
Oh, wow.
Um, and the case is about the murder of Libby Lewis.
Okay.
And we're going to be using excerpts from this 48 Hours episode
Mm-hmm.
called Postmortem to kind of get to the bottom of what happened.
Heard of this one,
Yeah,
yeah.
you've heard of this one.
It's a really sad story.
It is. It is really tragic.
Yeah, but it really makes you think about you know, justice in small towns, small town life,
Yeah.
and the impact of grief.
Yeah, definitely all of those things.
All wrapped up in this really interesting case.
So, right, and we're going to be meeting some pretty interesting people along the way, too.
Oh, cool.
So we're going to be meeting Libby's mom, Darcy,
Okay.
her ex-boyfriend, Matthew Edgar,
Mm-hmm.
and one of their friends named Bobby Ozan.
Okay.
And so, I mean, this case has more twists and turns than a back road in East Texas.
Oh, wow.
We're talking a suspect who practically confesses on his own. A mysterious blood stain that appears out of nowhere,
Interesting.
high-speed chases,
Jeez.
and an ankle monitor escape during the trial.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow, you're not kidding. This is going to be a ride.
buckle up.
Yeah.
So first, let's talk about how Darcy, Libby's mom,
Okay.
found out about her daughter's death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would think that she would have found out from the police,
Right.
but she didn't.
Oh, no.
She found out through town gossip.
Really?
Can you even imagine?
That's awful.
That's just a failure of
Yeah,
basic.
standard law enforcement protocols.
Yes.
Like, in these situations, there are very specific procedures
Yeah.
for notifying next of kin.
Right.
You know, it's designed to minimize trauma, make sure the family gets the support they need.
Right.
But in this case, it seems like all those procedures were just disregarded.
Yeah, completely thrown out the window. And you actually see this in the 48 Hours episode.
Oh, really?
They show police body cam footage of Darcy confronting the officers about this.
Oh, wow.
And she is understandably distraught,
Yeah.
demanding to know where her daughter is.
Mm.
And the officers just stand there silently.
Oh, my God.
It's so hard to watch.
Wow. Yeah, the officer's silence in that moment just speaks volumes.
Right.
Like it just compounded the trauma she was already going through.
Yeah.
You can only imagine the confusion and the anger she must have felt.
It's just unimaginable.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you learn about Matthew Edgar's past.
Oh, okay.
So he had a history of violence,
Mm.
including 3 high-speed chases in one day.
What?
Yes. In one day, he led police on 3 high-speed chases.
Oh, my goodness.
And at one of those chases, he actually caused a deputy to break his leg.
Jeez.
So it makes you wonder, how did this escalate to murder?
Yeah, that's a good question.
But what's interesting is that when Darcy was asked if she ever warned Libby about Matthew,
Okay.
she said, and I quote, "No, I don't like to judge people. I've made mistakes myself."
That's interesting. It's a really interesting perspective.
It is.
Like, it hints at a possible cultural factor in small towns.
Oh, yeah.
This idea of giving people second chances,
Right.
even when they've committed some pretty serious offenses.
Yeah, like a sense of forgiveness
Yeah.
and understanding that maybe wouldn't be as prevalent
Yeah.
in a larger community.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if that leniency might have inadvertently
Yeah.
contributed to this tragedy.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
So, but despite those initial missteps,
Okay.
the investigation does eventually get on track.
Okay, good.
Thanks in part to Sabine County Sheriff's investigator, J.P. McDonough.
Okay.
Now, the episode describes him as this stereotypical Texan,
Okay.
right, straight out of Central Casting,
All right.
which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But more importantly, he actually skillfully questions Edgar in the hospital,
Okay.
which ultimately leads to his arrest.
Gotcha.
So that skill, right, like the ability to build rapport,
Mm-hmm.
even with a suspect,
Right.
is crucial in interrogation.
Yeah.
Right. Like by establishing that connection, investigators can sometimes encourage individuals to open up,
Yeah.
reveal incriminating information.
Definitely.
And Edgar's interview is a wild ride.
Oh, really?
Like he just keeps contradicting himself.
Oh, wow.
And by the end, it's pretty clear that he's responsible.
Okay.
But then there's a twist.
What's that?
They find a blood stain on his face,
Okay.
and it's neither his blood nor Libby's.
What? Whose could it be?
Right. So that's where the case gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The episode really focuses on Bobby Ozan,
Okay.
the friend who's at the party that night.
Mm-hmm.
The same Bobby Ozan who catches catfish with his bare hands.
Wait, what?
You heard that, right?
Catfish with his bare hands.
Apparently, he can hold his breath for like 2 minutes.
Wow.
And he just wrestles these giant catfish out of the Sabine River.
That sounds made up.
I know it sounds crazy.
It's crazy.
But it's a true story.
Oh my goodness.
So it seems kind of out of place in this story.
It does, yeah.
But I think it highlights something important about small towns.
What's that?
They have these unique traditions
Yeah.
and these ways of life that outsiders might find strange or even comical.
Right.
But for the people who live there, it's normal.
It's their reality.
Right.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so it adds another layer to the story,
Uh,
this sense of place and community
I,
that's really central to everything that happens.
it's a reminder that even amidst this horrific crime, life in a small town continues
Yes.
with all of its quirks and eccentricity.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it kind of brings us back to that mysterious blood stain.
Yeah, so whose blood was it?
Right, why wasn't Bobby's blood tested?
Yeah.
You have to wonder if that could have provided more answers
Right.
or if something was missed during the investigation.
Yeah, that's a question that really lingers
Yeah.
as the case unfolds and we see more complexities.
So speaking of complexities, let's talk about Edgar's release.
Okay.
So he was initially granted a $50,000 bond,
$50,000.
which seems incredibly low for someone accused of murder.
That does seem low, yeah.
Right.
So the bail system can be incredibly inconsistent.
Yeah.
And this case is a prime example.
Okay.
So in Texas, the law mandates a reasonable bond.
Yeah.
But what's considered reasonable can vary greatly depending on the circumstances and even the judge's interpretation.
So what you're saying is there's a lot of gray area.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And that discrepancy in what's reasonable becomes even more apparent when you compare Edgar's initial bond
Okay.
to the $325,000 adequate bond that was set
Wow.
after he assaulted his ex-wife Montana while he was out on bail.
It's a pretty big difference.
It's a huge difference. Yeah, and it really raises questions about fairness
Yeah.
and how these inconsistencies impact public perception,
Oh, yeah.
especially for the victim's family,
Yeah.
who are already grappling with this unimaginable grief and they're seeking justice.
Right. So it just adds another layer of frustration to this whole situation.
Yeah, definitely.
And as if things couldn't get any more complicated,
Oh, no.
during the trial,
Hmm.
Edgar's ankle monitor malfunctions,
Really?
which he was wearing as a condition of his release.
Right.
So the battery dies,
Oh, geez.
and Edgar seizes this opportunity and flees.
Are you serious?
Dead serious.
Wow.
And here's the real kicker. The jury was never informed about his escape.
What? How is that even possible?
Right.
Wow.
It's surprising, I know.
Yeah.
But there are actually legal reasons
Okay.
why a jury might be kept in the dark about something like this.
Okay.
So the concern is that knowing that the defendant fled could unfairly prejudice the jury,
Okay.
leading them to presume guilt regardless of the evidence.
Yeah.
So it's about protecting the integrity of the trial,
Right.
but at the same time,
Yeah.
it feels like a crucial piece of information is being withheld.
It does.
So what do you think, listener?
Yeah.
Would knowing about Edgar's escape change your perception of his guilt?
That's a tough question.
It's a really tough question.
Yeah.
It's just one of the many complexities that we're going to be uncovering as we continue this deep dive into this case.
Alrighty.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. Like, was it pure panic?
Yeah.
Or like a calculated move where he thought he could actually get away with it?
Right.
It's fascinating to kind of try and get in his head and think, like, what was he thinking when he made that choice?
Totally.
So, but, you know, this whole case brings up so many other important questions, too.
Yeah.
Like, how do we balance this idea of second chances
Right.
with protecting potential victims?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Edgar clearly had a pattern of violent behavior,
He did.
but he kept getting opportunities to turn things around.
Right. It's a constant struggle, you know?
Yeah.
Finding that balance between believing in rehabilitation and ensuring the safety of the community.
Right.
It's a question lawmakers and law enforcement grapple with all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like the system just isn't equipped to handle these complex situations.
Especially in a small town like Hemp Hill,
Right.
where you mentioned earlier there's this sense of wanting to handle things internally.
Yeah.
We saw that with the initial response to Libby's death,
Mm-hmm.
and even with Darcy's reluctance to judge Matthew,
Right.
despite his past.
Yeah. Do you think that that dynamic of a small, close-knit community
Yeah.
can sometimes work against seeking outside help or intervention?
It's definitely a possibility.
Okay.
You know, that strong sense of community can be so powerful,
Yeah,
providing support and a sense of belonging.
definitely.
But it can also create a culture where people are hesitant to speak out against their neighbors
Right.
or friends, even when they witness something wrong.
Yeah, like an unspoken code of silence.
Exactly.
Wow.
And while it might stem from good intentions,
Mm-hmm.
like wanting to protect the community or maintain that harmony,
Right.
it can prevent people from coming forward with crucial information
Yeah.
or seeking help when it's needed most.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if there's a way to foster a sense of community responsibility
Yeah.
without creating that fear of speaking out.
Right.
Maybe encouraging people to see reporting this behavior
Yeah.
as a way of protecting their community rather than betraying it.
I think that's a really valuable point.
Yeah.
It's about shifting the perspective,
Right.
framing it as an act of courage and care
Yeah.
rather than disloyalty.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, the safety and well-being of everyone in the community
Right.
should be the priority.
It should be.
You know, as we're talking about this, it strikes me that Edgar's case really exemplifies
Yeah.
how ignoring warning signs can have really devastating consequences. So his violent tendencies were no secret in Hemphill.
Right.
Yet it seems like there was this reluctance to fully address the severity of his actions.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a danger in downplaying
Oh, yeah.
or dismissing these kinds of red flags,
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to patterns of behavior?
For sure. It's like hoping that if we ignore the problem, it'll just magically disappear.
Right.
But the reality is that ignoring those warning signs often allows the situation to escalate,
Yeah.
which could lead to much more serious consequences.
Right. It's crucial to recognize that addressing potentially dangerous behavior early on
Mm-hmm.
isn't about judgment or punishment,
Right.
but about intervention and prevention.
Totally.
It's about stopping something tragic from happening before it's too late.
Yeah, and it requires a willingness to acknowledge the problem,
Yeah.
even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient.
We can't be passive bystanders.
No.
We have a responsibility to each other, to our communities,
Right.
to look out for one another
Yeah.
and create a culture where safety is paramount.
It should be.
So this brings us to the trial itself,
Okay.
which, as we mentioned earlier, took a pretty dramatic turn with Edgar's escape.
Good.
So even though he was eventually found guilty in absentia
Right.
and sentenced to 99 years, the jury was never told he had fled.
Wow. Can you explain a little more about what in absentia means for those who might not be familiar with the term?
Sure. So in absentia essentially means in absence.
Okay.
So in a legal context, it signifies that the trial proceeded even though the defendant was not present.
Gotcha.
So in Edgar's case, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict without knowing that he had escaped custody.
It's mind-boggling to think that such a crucial piece of information wouldn't be shared with the jury.
Right.
Yeah, I know we talked earlier about protecting the fairness of the trial,
Mm.
but it still feels like a bit of a contradiction.
It does.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. It's
Sure.
definitely a point of contention.
Okay.
Some legal experts argue that informing the jury about the defendant's flight would inevitably bias their decision,
Okay.
regardless of instructions to consider only the evidence presented.
Right.
But others believe that withholding this information undermines the transparency of the judicial process.
So it's kind of a lose-lose situation.
It really is, and it raises all sorts of ethical questions.
It does.
Like what constitutes a fair trial,
Right.
and where do we draw the line between protecting the defendant's rights
Yeah,
and ensuring that justice is served?
that's a tough one.
These are difficult questions without any easy answers.
They are.
But what we can say is that Edgar's case really highlights some of the inherent complexities and potential flaws
Yeah,
within the legal system.
for sure.
And even though Edgar was ultimately convicted
Right.
and received a pretty lengthy sentence,
Mm-hmm.
there's still the possibility of parole after 30 years.
Really?
It's hard to fathom that someone who committed such a heinous crime could one day walk free.
Yeah, that's rough.
What are your thoughts on that, listener?
Yeah.
Does the possibility of parole in this case sit well with you?
Yeah, that's a question that often sparks a lot of debate.
It does,
Yeah, and it raises some complex ethical considerations.
for sure.
Yeah.
It really does make you question the whole purpose of sentencing. Right. Like, if someone can commit a brutal murder
Yeah.
and potentially be back on the streets after 30 years,
Right.
does it truly reflect the gravity of the crime?
It's tough.
What do you think, listeners? Does that seem like justice to you?
That's the hard part, right? Like finding what justice actually is.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about punishment, it's
Clean it
about
up.
rehabilitation, deterrence, providing a sense of closure for the victim's family.
Right.
And sometimes those objectives just don't line up.
Especially in Edgar's case, where his defense was essentially that he was too drunk to remember the murder,
Oh, wow.
despite, texting and driving that same night.
Wow.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
Even if he was intoxicated, that doesn't excuse taking a life.
No.
And it just seems so disrespectful to Libby's family,
It does.
adding insult to their unimaginable grief.
Yeah, for Darcy, Libby's mother, I mean, it must have been devastating.
Totally. And the 48 Hours episode portrays Libby as this young woman full of ambition and dreams, someone who likely would have left Hemp Hill
Yeah.
to pursue a brighter future.
It's a shame.
It's such a stark contrast to Edgar,
It is.
who seems stuck in this cycle of destructive behavior.
Yeah, and it brings up that question about small towns.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why do some people stay rooted in their hometown
Yeah.
while others feel compelled to leave?
That's a question that resonates with a lot of people, I think.
It does. It does.
And I think it often comes down to a complex interplay of factors.
Right.
Family ties,
Yeah.
economic opportunities, personal aspirations,
For sure.
even a sense of belonging
Right.
or identity.
Yeah, for some people, that close-knit community of a small town offers comfort and stability. For others, it can feel stifling,
Yeah.
limiting their potential and their dreams.
And it seemed like Libby
Yeah.
yearned for something more than Hank Hill could offer.
Right.
But escaping that gravitational pull of a small town can be really tough.
It can be, yeah. There's almost like an unspoken pressure to stay. Right.
Follow that familiar path.
Exactly.
There can be a sense of obligation, like you owe it to your family or community
Yeah.
to stay put and contribute.
Right.
But it could also be a fear of the unknown,
Yeah.
a reluctance to venture outside of your comfort zone
Totally.
and face the challenges of building a life somewhere new.
It's such a fascinating push and pull.
It is.
And Libby's story really highlights those potential consequences of choices, both the ones we make and the ones that are made for us.
Right. And she was just on the cusp of a new chapter.
I know.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
And what about Darcy?
Yeah.
Like, how does someone even begin to cope with a loss of this magnitude?
It's hard to even comprehend that depth of grief
Yeah.
that she must have experienced and continues to experience.
And that 48 Hours episode shows her tending to Libby's memorial.
Yeah.
And it's just such a poignant image.
Yeah.
It speaks to the enduring power of a mother's love.
Right.
Even in the face of this unimaginable tragedy.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the legal proceedings, the verdict, the sentencing,
Yeah.
none of that brings closure.
No.
The emotional scars run deep,
They do.
and the healing process is ongoing.
Absolutely. And for Darcy, that healing probably looks like honoring Libby's memory, keeping her spirit alive,
Yeah.
finding ways to channel that grief into something positive,
Right.
something that might prevent another family from enduring that same pain.
This deep dive into Libby's case has been such an emotional roller coaster for me.
It has.
We've unpacked so many complex issues.
We have.
The flaws in the justice system, the dynamics of small-town life, the ripple effects of trauma, and the enduring power of grief.
But amidst all the darkness,
Yeah.
there's this glimmer of hope,
Yeah.
a call to action.
This case serves as a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
No.
We need to be vigilant. Speak out against injustice.
Yes.
Support victims and their families, and work towards creating a world where tragedies like this become a distant memory.
Everyone deserves that.
And it starts with each one of us, listener,
It does.
by being more aware, more compassionate, and more willing to challenge the status quo.
Yes,
We can make a difference.
we can.
We can honor Libby's memory by striving for a future where every young person has the opportunity to live out their dreams,
Yeah,
free from violence and fear.
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It really has been a journey.
It's been an honor to share this story with you.
The honor was ours. And to our listeners,
Yeah.
thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Mm-hmm.
Let's keep the conversation going
Yes.
and work together to build a world where stories like Libby's no longer exist.
I'm with you.